Welcome to the CHCI Leadership Conference Afternoon Plenary Session, The Future of Cities and Communities, Equitable Infrastructure and Transportation. This session is possible due to the gracious contributions from our sponsors, General Motors, Waymo, Comcast, and Doordash. Our moderator for today's session is Gio Benitez, a transportation correspondent from ABC News. He covers aviation, railroads, the auto industry, and space for all ABC News programs, including Good Morning America, ABC World News Tonight, and Nightline. Our panel chair for this session is Representative Salud Carvajal from the 24th District in California, who will provide opening remarks. Please welcome Representative Salud Carvajal.
Hello, I'm Congressman Salud Carvajal. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in today's discussion on equitable infrastructure and transportation. I represent the Central Coast of California. I grew up in the Oxnard area where my father worked as a farm worker. I have served in the military, local government, and now lucky enough to serve in Congress. Throughout my career, I have seen the disproportionate impact that pollution, climate change, and limited access to public transportation have had on communities of color, like mine. I know how vital it is that we build a more equitable future for all. We need to ensure that everyone has access to transportation so that they can get to work, go to school, or visit their doctor when they need to. The bipartisan infrastructure framework legislation will help us do just that by making a historic investment in our public transit. California alone is estimated to receive $9.45 billion to expand transit opportunities and options. We must also invest in bringing broadband to underserved areas. Latinos are shockingly 15% less likely to have high-speed internet. In my district, the Martinez family drove around parking lot to parking lot to find free Wi-Fi access that could support their 4 children trying to access their online classrooms and materials to do their homework during this pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic has made obvious how access to the internet is vital to all our communities. We need to invest in broadband access today, the same way FDR's New Deal invested in access to electricity. The bipartisan infrastructure proposal dedicates a whopping $65 billion towards this endeavor. Latinos are also disproportionately impacted by the direct and indirect effects of climate change. Modernizing our energy infrastructure can help us build for the future, create jobs, and tackle the climate crisis. Building a clean energy grid will help us slow climate change and address air pollution, which impacts more than 23 million Latinos in the United States. Access to reliable transportation and resilient infrastructure is more essential than ever. I'm proud of the work that we have done so far to make our communities more resilient in a way that is equitable, and I will keep working to build on that progress. Thank you again for allowing me to join in on this very important discussion. Upward and onward.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Gio Benitez, and I'm the transportation correspondent over at ABC News. We have a very exciting panel of X here today talking about these critical issues on transportation, on mobility, on infrastructure. Of course, we want to thank Congressman Carvajal for kicking off that discussion, and thank you to CHCI for providing the Latino community an opportunity, a real opportunity to engage on this issue right now. So again, today, we are focused on the future of transportation and infrastructure, and this is something that we are committed to covering at ABC News. Of course, when we talk about this at ABC News and what my role is, I like to say that I cover how we move on Earth and in space, because I also cover the space industry. But today we are staying firmly on Earth, and we are talking about everything that it takes to build communities that truly work, and all of the technology that's required to really and truly make it better. So we have a great panel of experts. They're going to be front and center here on this issue over the past year. They've been here on this issue. They're going to keep being here on this issue. So joining me on the panel, let's go ahead and start bringing everybody in. David Quinalty, he is the head of Federal Policy and Government Affairs at Waymo. Hey there, David. Welcome.
Hi, thanks, Gio. Appreciate it. Again, I'm David Penalton, the head of Federal Affairs at Waymo. And for those of you who are maybe not familiar with our company, Waymo is a fully autonomous driving technology company that builds systems that can safely drive a car without any human behind the wheel. And we've deployed this technology in a public-facing ride-hailing service in the Metro Phoenix area and are working hard to bring that technology to other applications and in other markets. And I hope by the end of today's discussion, you all will have a good understanding about how autonomous driving technology can benefit your communities and how safety and accessibility are at the heart of everything that we do at Waymo. And also that every step of the way, Waymo relies on trusted partners like CHCI and the communities that you serve to safely develop our technology. Thank you, Gio.
All right, David. And there's going to be a lot of questions, I'm sure, about that because this is such an important conversation. So many people are wondering about it. So if you have questions, okay, just know this from the beginning. There's the chat function. Go ahead and type those questions in because later on in these conversations, we're going to be able to ask our speakers some of these questions. So just start. If you have questions, even if you think, oh, well, he's probably going to talk about it, just ask it anyway. And we'll get to it later on in the conversation. So David, thank you so much. Also joining us here, please welcome Tony Argote Jr., Director of Autonomous Technology at General Motors. Hey, Tony.
Hello, Gio. Good afternoon. And thank you for this opportunity, both you and CACI. It's really great to be here. Again, I'm Tony Argote. I'm the Director of Autonomous and Automated Driving Technology at General Motors. And for those that don't know, at GM, we're continuously challenging ourselves to be bold and invest in a future where we believe we can achieve a world of zero crashes, zero emissions, and zero congestion. And I'm really excited to be in the center of that focus here, working on technology that really creates to real solutions that we can put in vehicles that will also enable us from achieving our mission to get to zero emissions, zero crashes, and also getting to a point where we can work with industry partners and infrastructure partners to make sure that we have equitable solutions for our communities. So it takes everybody being in, and I'm excited to be a part of that. And thank you again for this opportunity.
All right, Tony, looking forward to your conversation there. Thank you so much. Also joining us is Leo Munoz, Senior Director of Federal Government Affairs over at Comcast. Hey, Leo.
Hey, Gio. Thank you for that introduction. I'm Leo Munoz with Comcast Universal. Telemundo, I'd like to note, is also part of our family of companies. And I'm very excited to be on this panel with my colleagues to talk about infrastructure and how we do infrastructure in an equitable way. And also to talk about how we're launching some smart cities initiatives ourselves within our company and to speak a little more about that. So thank you, Gio.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And finally, we're pleased to have Keith Fernandez, Senior Manager of Social Impact Communications over at Doordash. Hey, Keith.
Hey, Gio, thank you, and thank you to CHCI. As you mentioned, I'm Keith Fernandez, Senior Manager of Social Impact Communications at Doordash. I'm also a CHCI alum, so this is a great homecoming for me. I'm here to talk about Project Dash. Doordash's work to empower community organizations to leverage our logistics to increase access in their communities. This helps these organizations use the same technology available to our merchant partners, food banks, and other organizations to reach their client. This client is helping bridge inequities in our communities, and I'm excited to talk about how this affects the Latino community and communities of color across our country.
Awesome. Well, I think we have a great panel here, and everyone's ready to go. Oh, look at that, how everybody swoops in. I love that. So, Keith, why don't we actually start, because you talked about Project Dash a little bit. Tell us a little bit more about that, because I think that one of the really important things with this conversation was that we really needed to start out in a way where we could provide people with some actionable items. What are things that are actually happening out there right now to start making change? So why don't you tell us a little bit about Project Dash?
Yeah, thanks, Gio. This actually started an employee hackathon in 2017 and was launched in 2018. And Project Dash is the ability of food banks, food pantries, other impact organizations to use DoorDash logistics to connect their clients to deliveries via DoorDash. So this really looks like any other DoorDash delivery. A Dasher will go, they'll pick up from a food bank or food pantry or the organization and take it to a client's home. This is providing a lot of choice, convenience, and dignity for those receiving these deliveries, and also helps improve the lives of those who have mobility access issues or immunocompromised. And also, really, when it comes down to it, I mean, it's helping those who are working, want to spend more time with their family, might have transportation access inequities, find a way to get the food and stuff they need in a way that provides a dignified way to get it to them, in a way that allows them to continue living their lives.
Perfect. And tell me a little bit, like, is this something that was started because of the pandemic?
This was started before the pandemic, but we saw the need really scale up during the pandemic. So we made sure to partner with United Way Worldwide and other independent food banks and food pantries to ensure that the need was met during the pandemic. Of course, the stay-at-home orders and immunocompromised folks across the country really benefited from this. But I think what we've seen is the need to make this work permanent. We've seen the need for food access across the country, especially in food deserts, and the need for this work to continue so we can make sure to continue feeding our communities in a dignified way that provides convenience and provides choice for them, so they have the food they need to live their lives and take advantage of solutions just like the rest of us.
When you say dignified, is that what you mean when you're talking about, nutritionally and culturally appropriate?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when it comes to culturally appropriate food, I think a lot of times some folks are hesitant to access social services or access services that are available because it might be tough for someone to go to a food bank, but either through transportation access issues or just because it might be a little tough for them to just go out and seek help. This way they can contact a food bank. A food bank can send out a Dasher through DoorDash's Project Dash, and that person receives a delivery just like any other delivery. And that way they don't have to worry about questions like, well, what will the neighbors think? How will I get there? How will I get it back? How will I take public transportation to get this food from the food bank to my home? So this provides them a way to get it in a convenient manner that allows them to really be proud of the food that they're getting.
You mentioned a stat earlier that I thought was really fascinating. 85% of the deliveries go to BIPOC communities. That's a huge number.
Yeah, it really is. And we're proud of serving communities of color, and we're proud of the work that we're doing to really expand this work across the country and to make sure that we are responding to the needs of communities of color. Latino households overall experience higher rates of food insecurity. Since the pandemic, 47% of Latino households with children have reported food insecurity. So we're really privileged to be able to help and to be able to respond to the needs of the community, of the Latino community, and other communities of color.
Awesome, Keith. Thank you. Tony, let's go to you real quick, because General Motors, everybody knows the name. It's a massive, massive company. Tell me a little bit about what the company is doing to address these issues right now.
Yeah, thanks. So General Motors is taking some action when it comes to getting to our mission of 000, like I mentioned. But what that really means is we recognize right now that we're kind of living through one of the greatest technological revolutions of our time, really of history. I mean, if you think about the way that services have had to change over the last year or so, how we communicate, there's a lot of innovation going on. And we know that we're in a good position working with our suppliers and our partners on technologies that can help disrupt that and continue to disrupt that in a positive way. One of the things that kind of strikes me, and I think we all can relate to this, is 94% of crashes that occur, automobile crashes, are based on human error. And when you think about that kind of a stat, you can relate to something that for me is unfortunately some familiar feeling, getting that phone call that somebody was in a car accident, right? And kind of the feeling that sets with you. Knowing then that vehicles have the ability to prevent that or to severely prevent that is really one of the things that excites me about working in my. So when we're really trying to focus on advancing autonomy. We're trying to focus on making equitable investments so that we can bring EV and AV technologies to the forefront.
And obviously, this is something that when you think about infrastructure, EV infrastructure is a huge thing right now because people say, well, where do you charge them? Where do you charge them? So what are some of the solutions that GM is involved in with bringing to specific communities?
Yeah, so when it comes to EV charging, one of the things that we want to focus on is making sure that we're meeting customers where they're at. And so in April, we introduced a Ultium Charge 360 activity, which is really like a holistic charging approach to simplify our overall charging experience. So what that means is we're integrating into charging networks, we're getting vehicle mobile apps, and we're making sure we're bringing the experience to the customer. I can remember if I go back to just, I want to say it was maybe 5 years ago, when I had a Volt. I was fortunate enough to live in a community where I could drive to the grocery store and plug in. I could drive to downtown and plug in and go meet up with my friends. I could drive to work and plug in. And so that's the kind of experience that we want to invest in that really will propel zero emission technologies and an electric future.
I thought it was really fascinating when you were talking about that, 94% number, which we've heard before, but the fact that these crashes disproportionately affect communities of color. That's very interesting. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, when you think about some of our communities and really the congestion in some of our communities, that's part of what plays a role in this. And so we really need to think about, how do we equip our vehicles? How do we create programs where we can address transportation needs in very populated cities? And part of that, in my mind, is the in-vehicle technologies, both what can prevent an accident, if you're driving, or from an autonomous perspective where there isn't even a driver in the loop. How do we provide that sense of security and at the same time build trust? That's another key element here, is making sure that we're building trust, not just with the vehicle operators, but also the communities that we operate
in. With communities of color, can you tell me a little bit more about how communities of color respond to EVs and AV technology? Are you seeing any sort of difference there?
I can't say that I'm seeing a difference there. I think really, though, what we want to make sure that we're focusing on is that people feel that they can relate to the technology, that it's easy to understand, that it's not something that you have to have an owner's manual to really dive into and use. It needs to be something that's intuitive. And so that's why a lot of our focus is making sure that you feel comfortable, that you build trust from the start. That's what's going to get to adoption. And then getting back to access to EVs, just making sure that from a community perspective, we're working with state, local, and other policymakers so that the access is there. And it's not a question of whether you'll be able to charge when you're going to make your run to the doctor's office or to the grocery store. That's another barrier that I think we can pull together as a community to address.
Right, because the overwhelming majority of EVs are charged in single family homes, right? These are where people can install their own, charging infrastructure and not have to rely on it. But obviously in so many communities, I mean, here, even in New York City, it's not exactly the easiest because you have apartment buildings and, you don't necessarily have to charge apartment buildings.
Exactly. And back to my example with the Volt, I mean, I knew that I had, two forms of fuel, if you will, right? So I knew I could get around, but that wanting to make sure that I was always driving electric was really important to me, right? From a climate perspective. So we want to be in a place where you trust the technology, the access is there, it's equitable, and we want to make sure that everybody feels that they can be brought in and be a part of that. We want everybody in.
Excellent. All right, Tony, thank you. So let's stay a little bit on AVs. And let's go to David. Waymo. Tell me a little bit more about Waymo, because it's an AV driving tech company. Tell me a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. So at Waymo, we're trying to build the driver, not the vehicle. So the Waymo driver is what's known as a level 4 autonomous technology. What does that mumbo jumbo mean? It just means that our system is in control of the driving task at all times. A human doesn't need to be behind the wheel. They're not in the driving loop at all. And we've taken this Waymo driver and we've actually deployed it, as I mentioned before, in the Metro Phoenix area with a public ride hailing service. So you can use your app, hail one of our vehicles. The only difference between ours and what other folks have is that there's no one inside the vehicle. It takes you to where you need to go. We're also putting the Waymo driver into heavy duty commercial vehicles, trucking, and working also on local delivery. So this is something that we've been working at for 11 years now. We actually made that pivot away from driver assist technology, which is the kind of thing that you see in a lot of cars that people can buy today. That that you have to still have your hands on the wheel or still stay engaged. For us, we think that technology has a huge opportunity to improve safety as well as to improve mobility outcomes. But for us, the way to achieve those is by taking that human out of the loop to get at what Tony was talking about with that 94% of accidents. It's hard for us to acknowledge as people. We all love driving and think we're great at it. But ultimately, we're the bug that needs to be patched. We can't work around it. We have to kind of fix that. And then we can really deliver those safety, accessibility, and equity benefits that this technology holds so much promise for.
So when you say that Waymo is developing the driver, are you focused more on software, for example?
Yeah, so we build the entire hardware and software stack. We custom design our sensors, have them built for us. We build the entire hardware, build obviously that software. We're an Alphabet company, sister company is Google. So we have a lot of that history and knowledge about how to take advanced AI and software and meld it together into something that people really enjoy. And we're able to put that onto those various different vehicle platforms. And we developed this technology through a lot of different techniques. Obviously, simulation is really important. We also test on both closed courses and public streets to get that real world data to make sure that our system is able to operate on the roads as they experience in people's communities.
I wonder, what has the response been in Phoenix?
It's been really fantastic. We've had a lot of support from local officials. For instance, Chandler, Arizona, which is the bulk of our territory, the mayors there have been absolutely fantastic. People, look, it's something that's new at first, and they're kind of like, what is this thing? But we really work hard at Waymo to do a lot of outreach and education to the community, make sure that they understand what this technology is, how it works. We invite members of the public to participate in early pilot projects to help give us feedback on how the technology can be used in their day-to-day life. And really, it's become one of those things where it's just one other car on the road, which is the experience I think many companies have with this. Is at first someone, whether they're inside the car or outside of it, they're like, whoa, this is crazy. But then over time, it just becomes another ride, and hopefully one that they feel comfortable and safe in.
Amazing. All right. Well, thank you so much. And we're going to obviously keep going back to everyone, but I do want to remind everybody as they're listening to these conversations, don't just listen, think about your questions and send them in through the chat so that we have them to talk about in this conversation. Leo, let's talk a little bit about Comcast, because when you think about Comcast, I don't think it's the first thing you think of with infrastructure, but then when you really start thinking about it, you're like, oh my gosh, of course it's infrastructure. So tell me a little bit more about how Comcast pivoted during the pandemic, really expand connectivity to underserved communities.
Sure. Thanks, Gio. We had a lot of lessons learned, frankly. For 10 years, we had a connectivity program for low-income families that offered, high-speed internet for $9.95 a month. And 10 years later, it's still $9.95 a month, but the speed is, pretty much quadrupled since we launched it 10 years ago. And we thought outside the box, and when you listen to stories like the congressman told about a family trying to find activity in their car so their kids can do homework, we heard similar stories. So we created what we call Comcast, and we kind of beef up Wi-Fi hotspots in community centers, in churches, in local community centers that we work with and partner with to identify needs in the community, and then we go there and work with them to make sure that there's connectivity so that the community can access that at no cost, right? And go and have a safe place to do homework and things like that. Other interesting things we've done is we took our Internet Essentials model and with local governments and other nonprofit entities and created enormous contracts where, either a philanthropist or an organization said, I want to cover, this many hundreds of students' connectivity in this specific school district because I care about my community. And so those happen as well. And the interesting thing we learned about that is something that we're kind of witnessing a little bit with the emergency broadband benefits. Even when it was made available and even when it's free, does not necessarily mean that droves of people will come and sign up for the committee. There's still barriers. Sometimes it's language. I mean, there's several barriers in our communities that need to be overcome to make sure that people are comfortable with the technology and can utilize the technology to their benefit. And it's for that reason, Internet has been really successful, largely because we do partner with trusted entities in our communities throughout our footprint that are on the ground and other services, including digital literacy, to our communities. And to Keith's point, it could be that they deal with hunger issue, could be offering employee training, right, and education, English classes, things like that. But we really try hard to integrate ourselves into the community and the needs of the community so that people can learn to get access. But a lot of the Lift and Rise, which is a program for small businesses to help them stay connected and stay connected affordably. And also we help them out with some consulting on advertising small businesses that were impacted, minority-owned businesses specifically. Those programs didn't exist before the pandemic. We had Internet Essentials, but we really had to think outside the box.
And that seems to me like a monumental effort to do that, to bring internet everywhere to these communities.
We tried. Look, and to the congressman's point, there's $65 billion already, in this bill for broadband connectivity. There's billions more that have already been passed by Congress that are already being deployed through local governments and states. So we understand that we are a critical component to the success of Americans, both as individuals and as a society and as an economy. And so our main drive every day is to be sure that we're innovating not only to increase broadband speeds, but to help create options for smart cities so that the companies represented here can more effectively, deploy the innovations and the technology that they're going to be offering us in the coming years or in the coming months or in the coming days. So we try to make sure, innovating both increase speeds, yes, but offering different technologies and solutions on connectivity, but also innovating from a policy point of view. I mean, Internet Essentials, we're really proud of that. Programs like that didn't exist, 10 years ago, and we create now. It's a model for a lot of other folks.
Excellent, excellent. Keith, why don't we go back to you on Doordash specifically? Because it's interesting that you also have Latino social justice groups and other nonprofits, and you're working together with them to scale up these deliveries, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And really, we work with a lot of food banks and food pantries that serve Latinos and other members of communities of color. And the reason we want to scale this up is because there's a need, and they come to us with this need, and we also seek them out. Project Dash, I'm really proud, has done 900,000 deliveries since its inception. That's more than an estimated 15 million meals in more than 900 cities overall. So that's to everyone who's gotten one, and we keep growing every day. And we see that this is really useful in response to the issue of hunger in the Latino community. I mean, the USDA mentioned that 1 in 6 Latino households have at least one person going hungry at some point during the year. Another one is just Latino households are more likely to be experiencing hunger than non-Latino white households. So it's really important to us to get this right and do so in a permanent way that serves Latino communities, but really the communities overall who are underserved and just might not have access to this food otherwise.
Excellent. We're talking a little bit about the future of transportation and infrastructure, and I think that we wouldn't be able to really talk about that without talking about climate change. And Tony, let's talk a little bit about climate change, because obviously when you're looking at reliability and access to transportation and mobility, all of this comes together. Tell me a little bit about what, the automakers like GM, what are you guys doing about that?
Well, first, it starts with recognizing the fact that climate change doesn't impact every community equally. And as we move to an all-electric future, right, it's really important on us to lead a positive change that brings inclusive solutions. So when you think about what we're doing,
explain a little bit about that. Can you explain a little bit just a lot about that, about how climate change doesn't necessarily affect everyone equally?
Yeah. So if you think about congestion, if you think about pollution and overpopulation, larger cities, you're going to have different challenges as opposed to maybe more rural environments. And so it's really important for us. That's why one of the things we think about is a zero emissions future. Getting into these larger markets with zero emissions vehicles or electric vehicles can have a really positive impact in the local climates. So I hope I answered your question, Gio. So if I think about the future of work and EV access, infrastructure equity, and climate equity, those are basically 4 of the main areas that we're focusing on. So prioritizing workforce and how we're supplementing and providing safety and quality training and jobs, making sure that EV access is part of the equation, since we think that really has the opportunity to move the needle, focusing on infrastructure equity, and then also climate equity. GM just launched a $25 million climate equity fund to prioritize grassroots organizations. And that's part of our push to make sure that we're bringing everybody in. So you have the opportunity to apply for grants, and you can learn more at our social investment pages at gm.com. So in those 4 areas, that's where we're focusing on making sure that we have equitable climate action.
A lot of people don't think about this, but autonomous vehicles, one of the goals and one of the things that you've talked about is that it could also bring mobility to people who may not have that as they age through life. And that AV technology could be really critical for that.
You're absolutely right. And this is one of the places where we each have, again, a personal story and something that motivates us. And I think about my family and families that I know that are impacted by folks that have lost mobility as they age or as a result of some event in their life. Mobility is one of our forms of freedom, right? We have the ability to move around. And so I want to live in a world, and we want to work towards a world where our vehicles and the technology we're putting into them can really enable that and bring back that freedom to our customers. So I think about grandparents that do not have the ability to drive anymore and really want to go see their kids and their grandkids. I think that that's the kind of game-changing technology and the kind of impact that these autonomous vehicles and automated driving technologies can really help enable.
Absolutely, no doubt about it. Because I think that point of bringing mobility back to people's lives, that's really a pretty stunning and special thing to think about. David, when you're thinking, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say that on that exact point, we've actually worked with the regional public transit agency in the Phoenix metro area to explore exactly how this autonomous technology can be used to help seniors and people with mobility disabilities to get where they need to go. We actually worked with them on a pilot where their program that subsidizes those communities could instead use our AVs to get to where they need to go. And this is actually a Federal Transit Administration funded pilot program. And that report just came out showing that these folks really felt safe in the autonomous vehicle technology. They saw this as a way to go, and they actually used it more often than the traditional options that the transit agency offered to them. They saw that they really wanted to explore how this might be able to be deployed in a more permanent way in their communities. And this report is really kind of validating for how this technology can provide that independence, can provide that connectivity for folks who are already limited in their options. And when it comes to Hispanic communities, senior Hispanics are more likely to be disabled than non-Hispanic whites. And when it comes to working age Hispanics, they are half as likely to have a job if they have disabilities than Hispanics without disabilities. So this is a huge opportunity, and that percentage is also higher for Hispanics than for non-Hispanics. So that's a huge opportunity to provide independence, for instance, to our senior citizens who might be disabled or have challenges getting around, but also connecting working age Latinos to the opportunities in their community, to those jobs, to connect them to their families, to be able to reduce the costs of transportation, many of whom live also in transit deserts. So it's not just stuff to get around. They might not really have any options. So we see this technology as both extending for people with mobility challenges, but also as a way to complement existing transit opportunities. And then it goes back also to what Tony was saying, that, for instance, our fleet in Phoenix is a plug-in hybrid electric. Our fleet up in California that we're working on is battery electric. You can also reduce those environmental impacts that disproportionately affect communities of color. So these are really all kind of tied together, and we're really optimistic about the benefit that they might be able to provide.
Well, and tell me a little bit, David, about, and just to remind everybody, David, with Waymo, tell me a little bit about the different kinds of technology that could be used to sort of advance equity when you're talking about disadvantaged communities, when you're talking about BIPOC communities.
Sure. Again, when it comes to autonomous driving, you can see this in transportation as a service. So your classic ride hailing, for instance. This technology might also be able to be put into personal car ownership. So vehicles that people will be able to own just like they do with the regular cars, but it has the ability to drive for them. That's maybe a little bit further into the future, but that's another example where we might be able to give that independence to people who might otherwise be able to get around. Using autonomous technology for deliveries, whether that's for companies like Doordash in terms of directly to consumers, or reducing the cost of goods getting to where they need to go. These should all benefit people across the country, and of course, particularly in communities of color, and really actually in disadvantaged communities, lower income communities, where the price of goods, the price of getting to places can really have an impact on people's options. So really, when you think about transportation, I know Congressman Carbajal talked about the importance of internet connectivity, and it's absolutely critical in our modern economy to make sure people have access to the internet. But it still really, really matters to have that transportation infrastructure, to have access to mobility. Is such a basic part of being part of our society, a full-fledged member of society, as well as have economic opportunity. So, we really see autonomous technology. Maybe it's because I work for a company that focuses on this, but it can really benefit folks in a lot of different ways.
And that particular Phoenix study, what you've started in Arizona, is that something that you're looking to expand in other parts of the country?
In terms of the pilot, we're absolutely very open to working with other agencies and on whether it's a similar type of study or other ways that the technology can be used for those specific communities. But we definitely engage frequently with local and state governments, third-party organizations to find ways. Because ultimately, look, we're building this technology. This is brand new. No one's ever done it before, and that's a challenge. You also have to build it into a business that people actually want to use. The only way to do that is by partnering with those experts, partnering with the users, partnering again with folks like CHCI and the communities that you represent to get that input, to understand really how this is going to work in the real world. And we're always open to those kinds of opportunities.
And we have now about 8 minutes until we start getting to questions. So please go ahead and start submitting your questions in the chat there. Tony, tell me real quickly, because GM also has AVs in San Francisco, right? There's a program there.
That's correct. Yeah, we have, as part of our efforts with cruise automation, we do have a fleet in San Francisco. Similarly what David was speaking to, and we're actually collecting live miles and getting a lot of exposure to the technologies that we have on these vehicles. I also want to comment on the fact that these technologies, we want to make sure, and we're focusing on keeping an eye on making sure that they're scalable and that they can be provided downstream into retail autonomous vehicles and into, I should say, retail vehicles. A lot of these technologies are available today, and some of them we're focusing on in the future, really advancing their capability. When I think about some of the stories that I've heard recently from family members who've had folks, cut them off in traffic, a lot of the same, radar and camera-based technologies that are in vehicles today enable features like collision imminent braking, where the vehicle's going to take an action to help you prevent getting into an accident. So that's just a one example of how some of these things can be portable down into the retail space or into the customer vehicle space. And it's another reason why we're focusing on our investment in AV and EV technology.
How long, what's the timeline look like? Because I think that a lot of people, when they look at AVs and EVs, I think EVs, we have a little bit more of a timeline, but AVs in particular, do we have a sort of timeline on when we expect this to be much more popular across the country?
Two things. One, the future that we're working on, we think it's going to come a lot faster than many think. But it's going to take time, and it's something that it's like David mentioned. It's a difficult challenge to overcome and to prove. That's not preventing us, though, from making the investments that we need to make today in order to enable that. We're investing something in the area of $35 billion in EV and AV technology from 2020 to 2025, and that's right now. And we'll be releasing more than 30 new EVs globally by 2025. So it's really about setting the stage so that when we've proven that the technology is ready to roll out, we're in a good position to do that.
Yeah, and I had to add that for, I think, a lot of folks, when they think about AVs, they kind of like, when is it going to happen? They think about, for instance, the iPhone, and it's suddenly being available to everyone, everywhere, all at once, and it changes everything. That's not going to be the way AVs help people experience that. It's going to be incremental. It's going to be with that first commercial ride-hailing service down in Phoenix. It's going to be in San Francisco when companies like GM Cruise or Waymo deploy there. It's going to be in heavy-duty trucking and seeing it on the roads. It's going to be one of those things where you look up in 5 or 6 years and you're like, oh yeah, I experienced it here, or I use it every day there. And maybe not everyone everywhere has it, but it will be an increasing presence in our lives to the point where eventually it's just ubiquitous.
And Leo with Comcast, Leo, as we're talking about timelines, is there a timeline that Comcast is looking at for, really expanding connectivity across the country?
Well, I can speak to the fact that generally speaking, kind of goes back to the pandemic when everybody started working from home. One of the reasons we didn't have to scale back, people streaming Netflix or things they did in Europe for a few months was because we actually build our networks, thinking, okay, in 2021, we want it performing like we think what we need, 3 years from now, 4 years from now, right? So that's what we try to engineer to, is 3-4 years ahead for today. But also, I'll talk a little bit about, because with autonomous vehicles and in this vein, vision of the company called Machine Q that uses low power, ultra wideband connectivity, Wi-Fi connectivity, so that devices can speak to each other and cities and businesses can monitor things. Everything from street lights that need a light bulb change to a dumpster that may be half full. So then the truck gets the data and knows, I don't need to go pick up that dumpster today. I can wait another day, and they shave 5 minutes off their truck roll time. All of that matters, right? And that's what's, that example kind of parlays into what Tony and David are talking about in the autonomous vehicle space. Is, we're working on that technology so that, Right now, it's with human drivers, but in the future, autonomous vehicles will be able to get data as far as where they need to be and what needs to happen. And it's really good for tracking, frankly, inventory. And to Keith's project at his company, like monitoring how long has the pallet of lettuce been sitting sitting in the storeroom. Like, how soon do we need to move it? And you get all that data real time and can make smart decisions about reducing waste, improving efficiencies, things.
And for smart cities are something you're looking at, what, in the next 2 to 5 years? I mean, this is not that far off, right?
Yeah, it's happening now. We're all, today, all my fellow panelists have talked about how they're innovating. And, we're working with cities and local government now to help them deploy, these technologies so they can better manage efficiencies and more services that are being provided to their constituencies. There's a lot of demand for it, frankly. I mean, we've done everything from this technology to improve, like, in some cities they have, the gunshot sensors, and then, the police can kind of monitor maybe, where we need to go, a little bit faster, to, like I said, changing light bulbs, to monitoring water usage, right? And making sure, that, city services are where they need to be, and giving customers of some of these utilities also data on how they can improve efficiency or things like that. So it's happening. It's happening as we speak.
And you know what,
Thank you.
Leo, we're getting, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna kind of yes and that to say that, from a policy perspective, we know that we can't achieve this on our own, and we really need to have good partnership at the federal, state, and local levels, not just for the infrastructure and smart city piece, but also for electric vehicles and for autonomous vehicles. There's a couple of examples of policies in the U.S. That can make a big impact, like consumer incentives, including modification of EV tax credit and making EVs more affordable. So just to piggyback on Leo's point here, it does take a village. It's a full court press here, and we're really looking for support from our policymakers to make sure that we're enacting legislation that would also increase, for example, our cap on temporary exemptions for AVs. These are the sorts of things that could enhance or accelerate adoption of these technologies across the board, and help get this into the hands of all different communities.
I'd also toss in a plug for that commercial EV tax credit that House Ways and Means just included a couple weeks ago as well.
Excellent. All right. So let's go ahead and go to the questions, because we're getting a ton of questions right now. And the first one, we'll stay with you, Tony, from Alejandra Leja. Could you further discuss the technology on autonomous cars to avoid accidents, and how companies like GM and Waymo plan to keep the cost affordable so that it is possible for everyone to have it?
That's a
Tony,
really great question. Yeah, thank you for that question. So we have, we focus on a bunch of different, I'll call them sensing modalities. So whether it's radar, camera, or on some of our autonomous vehicles, LiDAR, there's a bunch of exciting technology that helps a vehicle and the driver perceive the world around them. And what I mean by that is we have, as David could probably comment as well, we have a really important task in making sure that we can detect, classify, plan, predict, plan, et cetera, so that the vehicles can maneuver in complex situations. So the sensing technologies that we're working on now, many of them already are on, retail vehicles, but it's a matter of stepping it up from a performance perspective. And so to do that, we have to keep an eye on not just the technology, but also the cost. So we work really closely with our suppliers to make sure that we've got the right design from the start. We're doing all the right engineering best practices, so that when we can roll out these technologies at scale, it's something that's not just effective and high performing, but it's also affordable.
Yeah, and I would add on Waymo's end, we've worked really hard to be transparent about our safety. We published the first safety report that was submitted to Department of Transportation. We published a first of its kind white paper last year outlining the safety methodologies and framework that we use to determine, when is our technology ready to be deployed in a particular environment. And so, we think it's really important to share that with the world because this is something that people need to understand, both policymakers as well as the public. And building trust is so key. You can't just be safe; people actually have to believe it as well. And on the cost side as well, look, Waymo's been working on this for 11 years. It's certainly not been a cheap endeavor. And for us, we really believe in the promise of the technology. If we can continue to refine it, bring it to more people and more markets, those economies of scale are going to kick in. And there's no question that right now it's really expensive. That's one of the reasons why we focus on these fleet applications initially, ride hailing, trucking, delivery, and which is why things like personal car ownership, at least for us, is something that we're looking at maybe on a longer time scale. So we think that that's a way that people can get access to this technology without having to buy their own car that's probably going to sit in their driveway 95% of the time anyways, and not really amortizing those costs. So for us, that business model is one of the ways that we're looking to make this affordable for users.
Excellent. And I'm going to ask the panel to raise your hand if you can answer this next question. There have been an increasing number of cyber attacks on critical U.S. infrastructure this year. We've all seen this. What actions are being taken to address these vulnerabilities? This is critical.
I'll start. Look, being one of the country's largest ISPs, I guarantee you somebody hack our network. Probably there are thousands of people trying to hack our network right now, every second. Cybersecurity is absolutely critical to our economy continuing to function as it has. It is absolutely critical, and I know the FCC, Department of Commerce, every agency that touches DoD, every agency that touches cybersecurity is on a lot of proposals out there. I can't speak to it as eloquently as some of my colleagues, but I do know that there is a lot of work being done in this space, and we're really proud, frankly, of our own cybersecurity team that keeps our network safe for all of our customers and our business customers to use on a day-to-day basis, because it is constant. It is absolutely constant.
All right, go ahead, David.
On the AV side, certainly cybersecurity is another one of those areas where people are going to want to feel a lot of faith that this technology is secure. I think it was actually a Fast and the Furious movie that had a bunch of cars being taken over by some evil hacker. So that's something that we're obviously very aware of. And as an Alphabet company, being born originally from Google, we've got a pretty strong sense of the cybersecurity risks that exist in the real world, magnified by the fact that our technology is moving a piece of metal through the world that has passengers inside of it and outside of it. So we take that really, really seriously. And one of the things that our technology is designed for is to have all that sensing and driving operations happen on board. We actually can't drive it remotely. There's no way for me behind a monitor remotely to drive the vehicle. So those control inputs are sort of air gapped in a way. This makes it much more difficult for a hacker to be able to take control of our vehicles. So there's a lot of ways you can build cybersecurity in from the ground up. But as anyone knows, and it's a never-ending battle to continue to stay vigilant, to poke and prod your own networks to stay on top of the standards and keep advancing to stay one step ahead of the bad guys.
Here's another question that just came in. Congress is currently working on a bipartisan infrastructure deal, but how can the private sector help create better physical and digital infrastructure? And where does EV infrastructure, where does AV infrastructure and broadband infrastructure fit into that legislation? A very good question. Who wants to tackle that? Okay,
I can
David?
jump in. I can jump in at least on the AV side. For companies like Waymo, we design our vehicles to operate on the roads as they are today. So we're not seeking special or unique AV specific infrastructure. We think that's absolutely critical just from a safety standpoint. How could our technology be safe if it requires the road to be built in a certain way? That said, there are certainly opportunities for certain types of infrastructure to be built out that take better advantage of autonomous vehicles. We're not really asking folks in Congress or in governments on anything specific around that. At the local level, we do talk about pickup and drop-off zones for ride hailing, which of course benefits autonomous vehicle ride hailing. And that's not necessarily specific to AVs, but one that we can take advantage of. But by and large, it's a good conversation to have about policymakers thinking ahead. How can we potentially take better advantage of this technology, mitigate any sort of the potential downsides that might come up? But right now, we're not asking for that road infrastructure. But again, given that AVs and EVs are so closely connected, you build out that EV charging infrastructure like Tony talked about. That's one way to really help. More EVs will get more AVs on the road, and more AVs on the road means there's more EVs on the road. So anything we can do to advance the EV charging infrastructure in this country, which we're going to need to if we hit the president's goals, is going to be really critical.
And I'll just add to that, what David mentions is absolutely correct. I mean, from an AV infrastructure perspective, it really is important for us to have an independence really in that regard. Vehicles have to be capable, independent of where each city is at. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be moving forward on infrastructure enhancements that could make operating an AV easier, but it can't be what we rely on. By contrast, from an EV perspective, I think the stat I last saw was over 90% of today's EV owners charge at home every day. And if we're really going to make EVs accessible to everyone, which is the goal, we really need to place an emphasis on public charging availability in all communities. It needs to be ubiquitous. So whether you're in multi-unit housing or whether you're in a single-family home, whatever it is, we've got to have more accessibility. That's going to accelerate adoption, and that's going to accelerate rollout of even more of these life-saving technologies.
And Leo, I think I saw you raise your hand there.
Sure. Yes, on the broadband piece, I'll say two things. This is a historic disbursement of funds for broadband deployment. I think the smart thing to do here and the equitable thing to do is, there are lots of rural communities where, frankly, the CapEx spend to lay fiber in these communities has been prohibitively expensive to spend, hundreds of millions of dollars to connect, a handful of homes that are acres and acres apart. I think we need to focus on technologies that will get more rural communities connected. We also have initiatives where we're working hard to better connect tribal lands in the country. And then we need to deploy and move, our fiber networks on a competitive basis where we can all go in and, see who can do the best and get it done. I think there's a lot of players in this space, including some local governments, and I think, we all have a bite at the apple to try to bring these technologies and bring connectivity to communities. And frankly, not going to be a one size fits all kind of thing. I mean, fiber is king for like a hardline connection. But there are some communities where fiber, frankly, that may not be like the right answer. It may be too difficult. You may have to blast through mountains or something, in some cases. We need to keep an open mind. And the other thing I would just say is we need to focus on doing what we can in the private sector, because as that was the past, continue with these initiatives that we have developed over the years that we find are making a difference in our communities, in lower income communities, by communities. And we're really proud of Internet Essentials. We announced today we're putting Pell Grant. If you're eligible for a Pell Grant, you qualify for I. And we have launched a $1 billion 10-year initiative to invest in connectivity and digital equity for low-income and BIPOC communities over the next 10 years. And we're hoping that through that, over the next 10 years, we'll reach about 50 people and work with well over 1,000 community partners across this country over the next decade. And we had some really good success with IE over the last 10 years, so we're hoping them to be even better. But it's going to stay focused and frankly do programs like Keith was talking about too, like use your team, your business model to help the communities that we serve.
Leo, let's stay with you because there's a question here from Carolyn. It's been said one thing that could change the gender wage gap is the concept of smart cities. How could this inclusive infrastructure help women in the future? Is that something that your team has discussed?
We haven't discussed that specifically, but I mean, look, after we live some life and work and right, I'm married and I have 2 daughters, so it's like that is really important to me, right? I think technology is a tool for improving efficiency and improving connectivity in a lot of different ways. So when you think about childcare, when you think about wage gap, I think that the more we invest in technology and the more data we collect on on wages, on who's serving what role in the household, et cetera, you're able to kind of tackle different problems and get a clearer picture of what is actually going on. So I like the question. I wish I knew more about it, exactly how it could work, but more data tends to help us make better decisions.
Perfect. We only have about 5 minutes left, so I just want to go through some of these questions very quickly. Why don't you take this one, Keith, from Jose Sanchez? How can Latinx folks starting out in their careers prepare themselves to enter the transportation infrastructure field? Have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I didn't start out entering the transportation infrastructure field myself. I'm a recovering lawyer, so this is obviously an upgrade. And I think
This is
that,
a perfect question for you.
yeah, really, I just got here. But I think that arming yourself with knowledge, arming yourself with skills, and arming yourself with the ability to be flexible and hold different ideas in your head, advocate articulately for your company and your causes, and really have a point to what we're doing. For example, at Doordash, I'm so pleased to be able to advocate for Project Dash and making this work sustainable because the pandemic shined a spotlight on this issue, highlighted the transportation challenges in the Latino community and how, food banks and food pantries could get to folks who might not be coming there. So when it comes to preparing yourself for a career in transportation infrastructure, I say study up and learn transferable skills.
Perfect. All right, here's another question. Electric vehicles continue to be incredibly cost prohibitive. What incentives can be put in place for EV manufacturers to create more affordable options? And is it likely that the cost of building EV vehicles will go down in the future? Let's go to our car guys. Tony, what do you think?
Well, I think so great question, first of all. And, some of it comes down to making sure that we've got the right technology investments, which is what we're working on. But the other piece of it is, I think, like we mentioned, making sure that we've got the right support from the community and the right support from our policymakers to help bring that technology to the mass market and to help drive that technology down. We're talking about incentives. We're talking about making sure that we've got access throughout our communities for charging, and also not just the vehicle incentives, but also incentives for the infrastructure. I was able to participate a while back on a program where my charge station was installed at a reduced cost, and that was thanks to a partnership with both utility and I think local policy makers. So that's where I think we have the best opportunity. It takes everybody getting in on this. On our side, we'll continue to focus on bringing the technology cost down.
Perfect. All right, we've got 3 minutes left. I'm going to do a little rapid fire, see if we can do this. Yvette's asking, did any of you use focus groups to measure feasibility of these services? Were Latino communities given an opportunity to voice insight as part of market research?
Speaking for Waymo, absolutely. We've done focus groups. We've gone into the communities and talked to people. We have an actual rider base, both pre-deployment in a pilot program and now with actual riders. And when it comes to those more controlled, studies and whatnot, we always try to make sure we have both a diverse set of folks and perspectives we're getting, but also one that reflects the communities that we're serving. So that's incredibly important to us.
Victor's asking, due to COVID, there's a shortage of drivers. What is something your company is doing to alleviate this situation, and how does it impact Hispanic communities? Keith, is that something that you can talk about?
Yeah, very quickly, I think that what Doordash is doing is we offer flexible work at the touch of a button. So the alleviating this is getting folks on the platform, making it easy for them to sign up, work the hours they want to work, when they want to work, and how they want to work. So I think that anyone from any community, not just the Latino community, can quickly get on the road just signing up on the Doordash app.
Perfect. Amaris is asking, how does the private sector continue to work with local federal government to advance equitable transportation and infrastructure? Is that an ongoing commitment by each of your companies?
Yes. You're constantly, you're
a resounding yes.
Yes, a resounding yes. And look, we're especially like on the broadband side, we're a highly regulated company, right? As is the auto industry. So we're constantly working with local, federal, government and policymakers all the time.
Here's a very big question.
I'll just chime in again on that one. Oh, Gio, sorry. I'll just chime in on that. I mentioned this before, but we actually, GM will help fund organizations that are trying to close that gap. And so I think we mentioned we have a $25 million climate equity fund, and that's something you can get involved in. Go to gm.com, go to our social investment page, submit a proposal, and we'll take a look at it.
All right, very quickly, our last question. What is the best way to help prepare people for new jobs when their current jobs are automated and they are replaced? Automated tech is great, but can cost working people their jobs. What are companies doing to ensure that new technologies do not replace blue-collar people?
Well, it looks like we only have a few seconds. Yeah. As I say, this is obviously a really complex issue that we probably deserves its entire own panel. I can say from Waymo's perspective, we are certainly aware of the potential disruption that may occur, which is why we need to have exactly that conversation with policymakers, with experts, with people, employers, and to think about what policies we can pursue to ameliorate any potential disruptions or unintended consequences. And the nice thing is that at least in the AV space, I think there's going to be time to address these. It's not going to be an overnight transition. So policymakers and the public have a chance to be deliberative and find a path forward that works.
Perfect. I want to go ahead and give each of you a closing thought, and if there's anything else you wanted to add to that, use that time as well. But let's go ahead and start with Tony. Your closing thought on what you want people to.
Yeah. So I'll say thank you again for having us on this panel. I really appreciated sharing the stage here with this really great distinguished group. What I want to make sure to leave the team with is two things. Back to the previous question, STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, got to be a focus. And it's one of the things that we're doing to make sure that we don't leave any of our communities or our workforce behind. So continuing to prioritize initiatives to help continuing education is part of that mix. And the last piece I'd say is, like I mentioned at the start, we're at the start of a really exciting time from a technology perspective. And we need to continue to focus on making these things accessible, equitable, and focused by our local, state, and elected officials and policymakers so that we can really advance the adoption of these technologies. So thank you for the opportunity.
Excellent. Leo?
Thank you, Gio, for moderating today's CHCI. I just want to say it's been great to be with these panelists. There's a lot of exciting things happening. At Comcast, we're just going to continue to with a purposeful focus on bridging the digital divide and serving all of our communities. And if you want information on some of the things I talked about today, you can search for Comcast Machine Q, like the letter Q for smart cities, or Project Up, which was more about our $1 billion 10-year commitment. to closing the digital divide and focusing on digital equity. But thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you. Keith.
Yeah, thank you, Gio. Thank you, CHCI. It's been great being on this panel with these wonderful professionals. At Doordash, we're going to continue our work to ensure that we're connecting food banks, food pantries, and others to underserved communities in a way that's sustainable, in a way that makes permanent the gains that we've had in food access. I think this is a really exciting time for this kind of space. And it's a really exciting way to help connect people to services that they need. So if you want to learn more about our work, go to DoorDashImpact.com, and I look forward to being able to share the new developments with you whenever they happen.
Perfect. And David.
Thanks, Gio. And again, like the rest, I'm very happy to be here with these esteemed professionals, and frankly wish we could see all the folks in the audience right now. But when it comes to Waymo's work on this, we really see a huge amount of promise in this technology to address those 40,000 lives that are lost every year on our roads. Safety is what motivates us, what drives us. And with traffic accidents disproportionately affecting people of color, you think of pedestrian accidents happening more often in cities. There are so many different ways that as we advance this technology, it's going to impact and provide advantages for those in the Hispanic communities, other folks who are disadvantaged, as well as the economic benefits. And for us, we're trying to move forward. We want to work with communities to understand how this technology can get out there. Again, we're building that Waymo driver, which can be used in a lot of different applications. So if there's anyone in the audience today who has some ideas or organization that maybe can partner with us, or an angle that maybe you think we haven't thought about, please feel free to reach out to us. We're always seeking ways. We partner with a lot of different groups across the board in a lot of different ways, and that's really important to us to get that real world experience. So thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And also, I want to give a special thank you to our wonderful ASL translator at the corner of your screen there. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, especially during the rapid fire questions at the end. I appreciate that. All right, we obviously have so much more to talk about here, but we don't have the time. There were a couple of questions, but why don't you continue the conversation over on social media? There's a hashtag for you, okay? Here it is, CHCI HHM for Hispanic Heritage Month 21. So it's hashtag CHCI HHM 21, and we can go ahead and route those questions over to the right panelists. But thank you all so much for being here, and thank you all for inviting me. We're excited to cover transportation at ABC News in such an in-depth way. So I do appreciate you having me on here. So thanks so much. Have a great afternoon, everybody, and happy Hispanic Heritage Month.